Okay, so we're going to look at some filters in Photoshop for this activity. So you will have already read about filters and learnt about them in active learning. So this video is really just to draw your attention to some of the more sophisticated and more useful filters, just very quickly. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the difference between applying filters destructively and non-destructively. So for example, I'm just using this image as an example. If I go to Filter, and let's just apply a mosaic, which is basically going to pixelate this image. Okay, now if I apply that now, that is a destructive process. It has permanently changed the pixels in this image. I cannot go back. I can undo, but I cannot go back and change the settings. So I'm going to undo that. And this time, I'm going to convert this layer to a smart object. So I can either do it here, convert to smart object, or I can go to Filter, convert for smart filters. It's the same thing basically. This is now a smart object, which means if I do the same thing, pixelate mosaic, you'll see that it applies the filter as a smart filter, which means I can turn it off and on. I can double click on it to go back and change the settings. And I can even use a layer mask to selectively apply that filter. Much, much more powerful. So it's a smart way of working. And Photoshop CC 2020 now supports all filters with smart filters. So I'm just going to undo this back to that point. So let's have a look at the liquefy filter. So liquefy can be applied to a smart filter or a smart object. So I'm going to go to Filter, Liquefy. Now liquefy requires a fairly good graphics card. If you find that liquefy either won't work properly or gives you a lot of problems, you might find your computer's graphics card is not up to the job. So what liquefy does is it pushes pixels around. Basically, you can smoosh your pixels around. There are a lot of settings here. If you want to know what all of these settings do, go and look at the active learning and all the material for this learning unit. But what I'm going to do is draw your attention to just a few of them. So let's say that I want her hair to be a little bit less kind of out of her neck. I want it to go a bit closer to her neck. So I can use this tool up here called the forward warp tool. I can set the brush to a particular size using my square brackets, and then I can just nudge those pixels, and you can see it's giving me a sort of ghost of where they used to be, and I can adjust things like that. Now a lot of these settings you can just go in and experiment with. I'm going to uncheck show backdrop, so you can see it's actually warped those pixels. If I actually choose to show the mesh, you can see what it's doing. It's kind of it's warping the picture based on a mesh. Now the really useful thing now in liquefy is the face aware liquefy. So if you have a face, it doesn't even have to be face on, it can even be at a slight angle. You can actually adjust facial features with liquefy. So let me just go in and show you this. So if I go to eyes, and because she's facing me directly, I can actually lock her eyes together, so I don't have to treat them separately, and I can do things like adjust her eye size, the height, the width, the tilt, the distance. I can adjust her nose, so nose height, nose width, and mouth, and so on. So I'm not going to go through all of the settings, but basically you can see how amazing it is that you can actually warp quite easily someone's face. Now you can do this for fun effects, or you can do it to seriously just slightly adjust a portrait of a model. So the kind of fun effects, like you've got all these different warp tools up here. So if I go to the bloat tool and give her kind of a cartoony look, let's go to pinch. Okay, so you can have fun. You know those sort of postcards you get of puppies with great big eyes and that? It's all done using this kind of software. So you can have fun with Liquify, but actually it's a pretty useful tool for a lot of situations as well, where you just need to move pixels around a little bit. You can do it very selectively. It's a pretty powerful dialog box, this. So I'm going to leave Liquify. And all of these images are available to you in the module asset pack. And I'm going to move on to, I'll keep this image open, but I'm going to move on to the filter gallery. So filter gallery. And this is where you have access to all these kind of abstract, kind of stylized filters. I mean, you know, I'm not a huge fan of these filters on their own because they don't require much skill to apply. But if you apply them thoughtfully and together with what else you know about Photoshop, you can achieve some interesting results. So really, it's just up to you to go in here and experiment. So for example, if I choose, let's try, let me go for something, let's try sketchy. Okay, I can actually, every single one of them that you choose has its own settings here. So you can choose like charcoal thickness, dark and light balance, and so on. And then you can add. So if I add another filter, I can then change that to something else. So now I've got poster edge. I'm going to turn that one off. Charcoal palette knife. And everything is calculated from bottom up. So if I change the order of my filter, I get a completely different result. So if I put poster edge at the top, that gives me a completely different result. So I can build up a stack of filters to achieve a certain result on a photo. And really this is just a playground for you to have fun with. There's no do's or don'ts. Just experiment, get familiar with it, and use it in appropriate situations for yourself. Alright, so I'm going to cancel out of that, and I'm going to move on to what I think are the more useful filters. So something like this photo was taken with a fisheye lens, and so everything's curved around the center point, as you would expect with a fisheye. But what if I needed to use this photo and I wanted to straighten it up? That would be quite difficult using something like Liquify or the other tools that we've learned in Photoshop. So I'm going to go to Filter, Adaptive Wide Angle. And this is a special dialog box that's dedicated to doing exactly what I want to do. So over here I'm going to change the correction to fisheye. And then I'm literally going to drag on all the curves that I want straightened. So the side of this building I'm going to drag along there, and it will straighten that. I'm going to drag along the edge of this building, and I'm just going to keep going around, straightening up where I want to straighten. This this pedestrian crossing, I need that to be straightened, and this pavement here, I need that to be straightened. And once I've straightened everything to my taste, I've got now these transparent areas. So I need to scale this up so that those transparent areas are no longer there. And then I'll press OK. So that's straightened. I'm just going to undo. That's before and after. Before and after. So it's a pretty awesome tool for straightening up curves, or even like if you photograph a building and it kind of goes into perspective at the top. This is a fantastic tool to straighten up those sort of things. Alright, moving on to something called Vanishing Point. So what I have here is a photograph of a cardboard box, and what I have here is just a picture of some wrapping paper. So what I want to do is I want to wrap this paper around this box. So I'm going to select, so Command or Control A to select all. I'm going to take my Move tool and I'm going to drag this into the Vanishing Point picture. Okay, there it is. Then what I want to do is I want to select that everything in that layer. So I'm just going to call this layer wrapping paper. I'm going to press Command or Control A, and then I'm going to cut it. So edit, cut. So that's now on my clipboard. Then I'm going to go to Filter, Vanishing Point. And I want to create a plane for the top of this box. So I'm just going to click around the edges of the top of this box to create a plane. Let me just correct it a bit there. It's a little bit off. Okay. And then what I want to do is I want to go back down to this button here which says Create Plane, and I want to just drag another plane from this handle here down to represent the front of the box. And I'm just going to adjust these corners a little bit so that they fit nicely in there, like that. Okay, so now I've got those two planes created. So the whole thing with Vanishing Point is it only works with planes. So flat surfaces, so things like walls, if you want to put graffiti on walls, that sort of thing. Now I'm going to paste that image in here. So I'm just going to use the shortcut for paste, which is Command or Control V. And that is now pasted into this picture. Now I'm going to drag it, and as I drag it over a plane, it actually wraps itself onto that plane. And it's quite amazing. It actually fits over the box because I've made those perspective planes. So once I've done that, I'm going to press OK. And then I'm going to change my blending mode for that wrapping paper layer to multiply. And so very quickly I've been able to wrap an image around a box. So this is fantastic for things like prototyping and mock-ups if you want to put your design onto a box and things like that. So very easy to use, but it has to be on flat surfaces. It cannot work on curved surfaces. Alright, so that's Vanishing Point. Let's have a look at our blur filters next. So here I've got a photo I took at the Botanic Gardens, and I'm going to go to Filter, Blur Gallery, and I'm going to choose Field Blur. Okay, so the field blur basically is this pin that's placed in the image that allows me to control how much blur. So if I just drag on this dial, I can put my blur down to 0 or up to max. But what I can do, which is even better, is I can place multiple pins. So I'm going to set the blur down to 0 for this lotus flower. Then around the lotus flower, I'm going to blur it up quite a bit. And I can even move this pin in a little bit closer. And so I can actually control with great precision how much blur I get in the image. I'll put one more in over here. And then in the blur areas, you can also add bokeh lighting. So that's kind of those flares of lighting that you get, which gives it kind of an interesting photographic look. So that is the field blur. So I'm going to turn that off and go to the next one, which is the iris blur. And so this one really is almost the opposite. The inside stays sharp and the outside gets blurred. So if I push the blur up, you'll see outside of this area becomes blurred. And then I can change the shape of this. So if I wanted the flower to be mostly not blurred, I'm going to need to change the shape of this blur or this sharp area. Okay, and then these buttons here control, these handles control the fall off. So in other words, how sharp is the edge of the blur or how feathered is it? And here you can control the roundness of the edges. Okay, so that's also pretty useful. That's the iris blur. The tilt shift blur. Tilt shift is really a blur that kind of is used to make things look miniaturized. So it's often used for like shots of cities to make it look like it's kind of Toy Town, because it has a blur, it has a field of view similar to what you would get if you were using a camera on a smaller scene, and you had a narrower field of view. So here you can control things like the fall off, the position of the fall off, so it's going to blur more outside of these lines. Okay, and here I'm going to move this one out, and so I've got this heavy blur at the top and the bottom, and not much of a blur in between. Okay, this isn't really the best photo to be demonstrating this on, but if you use this on a photograph of a more wide scene, like, as I say, a city or a stadium or something like that, it kind of gives this idea of kind of like a toy town effect. So path blur, that's the next one down. We've used that quite a bit already in previous activities, so I'm not going to go through that. And then spin blur does what you would expect it to do. It actually creates a spin. So if you wanted to, let's say you had a gambling roulette wheel and you wanted to create the impression that it was spinning fast, or the wheels of a motorbike or something like that, the spin blur will allow you to do that. So those are all of the blur gallery filters. There are some other blur options under filter blur. These are more the old legacy Photoshop blur filters. Probably the Gaussian blur is the most common one. That just adds a general blur to whatever you have selected. Okay, so I've just covered some of the more useful filters. There are lots of others. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and see you next time.